Are you ready to make the most of your oil and gas mineral rights? Welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. Get the knowledge and resources you need to manage your minerals and royalties. Here is your host, Matt Sands.
Hello and welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Sands, and I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Williams, and we're here to help you make the most of your minerals and royalties. And in this episode, we're going to cover more listener questions for the month of October of 2024. And, no scary questions here, Justin. We just have sort of the typical list of questions related to both investing and getting into owning minerals and royalties. And then for those that already own minerals and royalties, there's questions about taxes and how to calculate your net interest and how to figure out exactly what you own, which I think is a very common question.
Yeah, it seems to be common. It's heavily weighted with investing questions, which makes sense. Good time to buy. But it just kind of covers the gamut of the normal stuff. So Matt, I thought this first one here was pretty timely. So Joy says, I'm a mineral owner. I was wondering if there's any way to avoid the outrageous taxes on royalties. And Matt, don't we wish? There are some things that you can do and should take advantage of. However, it's pre-taxed income. So it is something that at the end of the year, you have to plan for. And so royalty income is treated as ordinary income. Same with lease bonus payments. The sale of mineral rights and royalties is subject to capital gains, which is typically 15%. You only have to pay taxes on the profit of the sale, proceeds less the cost basis in that property, which you can determine via a retrospective appraisal that will look at the value of the date of inheritance. And Matt, this is something that clients come to you quite often for, because you're paying capital gains on zero to whatever the property was sold for is not as favorable as paying from a step up in cost basis from whenever it was inherited. There's also the depletion deduction, which applies to royalties, and that's the ability to deduct 15% of the gross royalties received, subject to some limitations. The other way is of cost depletion requires engineering analysis, and this is not something the average mineral right owner will typically take advantage of, but has every right to. Some investors use that and a combination of the two to optimize their tax deductions. And royalty income is a passive income unless you're typically a full-time investor. So working interest will change that slightly. It means you have an active investment in that. And you can deduct some losses against other ordinary income and so on and so forth. So Matt, this is just a super common question. And I think it can surprise a lot of mineral owners that remembering to save for taxes, especially that first year.
Yeah, that's a key point, to make sure that you set aside some of that royalty income to pay taxes. And if it's enough, if it's significant relative to your other ordinary income, you may need to make estimated tax payments throughout the year. So that's definitely where a qualified CPA is worth their weight in gold, and they can help estimate what those payments should be for you, and so that you don't get hit with a penalty when it comes time to file your taxes because you underpaid. So that's really important to think about. And, it's really nice. You get a nice fat royalty check, especially if you have some new wells that come online, but you always got to remember in the back of your head, okay, I need to be setting aside some of this to pay taxes on, like Justin said, because they typically don't deduct income tax unless you neglect to give them your social security number or taxpayer ID, and in which case it's a penalty. They'll basically deduct what they call backup withholding. Just by law, they're required to do that if they don't have taxpayer identification, because the government wants their share one way or the other. And of course, in that situation, they may be deducting more than you actually owe, and then you'd have to wait to file your taxes to get a refund. And so it's usually more beneficial to, provide that tax ID number to the operator in a timely manner so that you don't get that backup withholding deducted. Like Justin mentioned, a few things to note. If you do sell your interests, you can deduct the basis of that property from the proceeds of the sale to determine your capital gains tax liability. And like Justin said, it would require hiring a professional appraiser and getting a report done, because it's very rigorous, it's a very involved process. But if the sale of that property is high enough, and if you inherited it in the last 10 years, there's likely significant value associated with that property, especially if there have been horizontal wells drilled. And, that property might have had significant value and you inherited it. And so your capital gains tax liability may not be as big as you think in that case. And so that's why it's a great idea to have somebody take a look at that, just to understand the cost benefit analysis of getting that retrospective valuation. Because, if you spend $5,000 on a retrospective valuation, but you save $50,000 in capital gains taxes, that's pretty much a no-brainer. And, so they can help you determine if it makes sense to do that, or if unfortunately you may just need to take a zero cost basis and just pay the capital gains tax on the full proceeds of the sale, which is sometimes something that you have to do if there wasn't much value when you inherited it. And then so the other side of thing is you do have some other taxes out there. There's severance taxes, which is at the state level. It's basically their cut of the oil and gas that's sold, their tax on that. And there's really no way around that. The operator will deduct that from your royalty check typically before you get paid the net amount. So that'll be show up on your check as a deduction. Another thing that shows up in some cases is a separate tax bill that you'll get from the county tax assessor. And in Texas, for example, you get taxed on royalties that are paid in that year. And so that's only on producing property. So if you have non-producing minerals in Texas, you don't pay property tax on that. On the other hand, other states like Colorado do charge property tax, even though it's really a small amount. You may get that property tax bill each year, even if the minerals are not producing or have never produced. And so it's something you've got to account for and pay that small bill. Otherwise, it could go to a tax lien sale and you could lose that to a tax sale. And so you wouldn't want that to happen. So whatever your case, whether you're a sophisticated investor or you're just newly finding out that you've inherited minerals and royalties, getting a good CPA that understands oil and gas taxation is really important because they can help you maximize those deductions and so that you don't have to pay more than you need to. And so I have a tax guide that's available. If you would like to download that, go to the show notes at mineralrightspodcast.com, look for this episode, and then there'll be a link there to get my free IRS mineral valuation and tax resource guide that has some additional information. So yeah, thanks for writing, Joyce, and good luck.
Absolutely. Yeah, and definitely plan. So our next one here, Matt, is related to investing. And Steve says the number one thing I'm trying to learn is who to invest with. I want to put money in a fund that buys and manages mineral rights. And Matt, we've done several shows on this in the past about different avenues of investing in mineral rights. And that's episode 126, where we kind of take a deep dive on investing in mineral rights and royalties and working interest as well. So that's a great place to start. Matt, I'm sure you have a lot to add to this conversation.
That's a great one to start with. We go through the different ways to invest. So we'll have a list of all the different episodes we've covered on investing and the nuances with that and strategies, because there's all kinds of different things you can do from, going and just buying stock in a publicly traded mineral company, mineral royalty trust, or you can go the next route and sort of what Steve is looking at is wanting to put money into a mineral fund. And so typically these are available to accredited investors only. So that is something to keep in mind. So that the criteria for that is something the SEC outlines, and it's, a certain amount of net worth and a certain amount of annual income and all those things. And so that's something to look into. If you do qualify, that could be an option. And what they do typically is they get, mostly funds that are, I would say, in the maybe $10 to $100 million in total invested capital. And you would buy your fraction of that and become a limited partner. The general partner is the group. It's typically the management company. They'll get paid a management fee, which is around usually 2%, and they'll get a carried interest after a preferred return rate is returned to the limited partners. And so that is usually like an 8% return. So you kind of get that preferred 8% return. So you get paid that 8% return on your initial investment. And once they've gotten that, then they will back into a larger interest into the remainder of that return on investment. So it can be a good way if you have a good reputable company that has a proven track record in delivering a positive return for their investors. That can be a good way to invest in minerals and royalties. It's sort of a hands-off approach. You're paying the mineral fund to manage it on the limited partner's behalf. There's different ways to go down that rabbit hole, like Justin said. We go into each of the different ways, whether it's down to the level of, buying on EnergyNet, which is maybe the next level, and doing some of the due diligence yourself, to partnering with advisors to help you, both legal, land, and then on the engineering side for getting an evaluation done to understand what the property's worth, to make sure you're not overpaying for it, to going out and actually sending letters to mineral and royalty owners. And there's all different people out there. There's definitely reputable folks out there making a living investing in minerals and royalties, and they're providing service to those folks that need to sell for whatever reason. And then, but you also have to be careful with that approach from a mineral owner perspective, because the language in any instrument that you get can be tricky to understand and make sure that you're getting paid fairly. You have to know what the property's worth and all those things. So definitely it's a situation where, as my friend Jimmy Wright likes to say, it's seller beware. So from the other side of the coin, that's something to think about. But definitely a lot of ways to invest, and it can be a great way to get direct exposure to oil and gas, although it does certainly have its risks. So thanks for your question, Steve.
You said it, Matt. And, in our segue of our next question here, so Bruce looks like he's in the situation of having just invested. He says, "Hi, Matt. I'm a first-time buyer of oil and gas mineral rights. After evaluating 2 different companies and offerings, I opted to do a 1031 exchange of a rental property. It's been a real slow start, but they're saying I'll get royalties back to October of 2023, the initial offering date, by the end of April. They've been communicative, but since all this is new to me, he's looking for somebody to kind of confirm that this sounds right to them, I'm guessing, Matt." And Bruce referred to a 1031 exchange, and that's a like-kind exchange where you can sell an investment property and reinvest the proceeds into another investment property, and that defers the payment of the capital gains tax, basically. And because mineral rights are a real property, they are eligible for like-kind exchange from another piece of real property, like a rental property or a home. And it's in order to qualify for a 1031 exchange and to get that tax deferred benefit, there's some really strict timeframes you have to follow. And if you want to learn more, there's episode 54 about using a 1031 exchange to defer capital gains tax, and that would be a great place to listen.
Yeah, that's a great place to start. Like Justin mentioned, very strict guidelines and strict timeframes to keep in mind. So that sometimes can be challenging when dealing with minerals and royalties, because you're trying to align the timing of when you want to invest with trying to find the property. And so that's certainly something that can be done. And, whether it's working with a broker that has, offerings that they're, their properties that they're selling a portion, and they can kind of tailor the amount that they're selling to how much you're looking to invest. Of course, in that case, it's important to get somebody to help you with that, to make sure that you're not overpaying, to get, evaluation, to make sure you understand what the property's worth before you pull the trigger on that. There's always the property needs to go through a qualified intermediary, like Justin mentioned. So that means that there's, not you getting direct title. There's somebody that takes ownership through the process to make sure that the requirements are followed, the tax code. So that's important. But the thing that's interesting about your question, Bruce, and I think, when you wrote this in, it was the middle of April. So, they said that they were going to start paying you royalties by the end of April, which is, I would say, sounds reasonable to a certain extent. You closed on January. They have to notify the operator, because with a 1031 exchange, you take direct title of that property. By definition, you have to in order to qualify for a 1031 exchange. So, they have to go and record the deed. It has to go to the operator. They have to change their pay deck, and they start to pay you royalties instead of the fund that you bought it from. So that definitely takes time. I've had that experience in just investing in minerals directly and having to notify the operator. And in some cases, they don't do that in a very timely manner, and you have to follow up several times with them to get that ownership change finalized. And so that may be part of what's taking so long. But, you want to make sure, if you haven't started receiving royalties now, this is middle of September when we're recording this, reach out to me, and I'll happy to help give you some ideas of what you can do to get that going and to make sure that you get paid those back royalties to the effective date of October of 2023, which was the initial offering date. So yeah, I think that's certainly something to think about. And then with these types of 1031 exchanges, the companies that facilitate these will often manage the interest on behalf of the investors, that as a an additional fee, basically an annual fee percentage of whatever royalties. So they're basically the mineral manager for you, and so it's sort of more of a hands-off situation. Or some investors want to manage those themselves. So that's something you have to decide before going into this. Do I want to be the one to do all the legwork and to notify the operator and to make sure that I'm getting paid correctly, and to make sure that everything is going directly to me And that can be somebody that has some time and interest and willingness to learn about how to manage minerals and royalties. That can be a good option as well. So certainly different ways to go about it. And then there's other ways to invest if you're thinking about doing a 1031 exchange. And I actually have a client that I'm working with right now and helping him with this process. And some of the different things to think about and ways to identify property. Energy Net is one option because they do have several of the auctions that they run that you'll see a disclaimer there that the property is intended to qualify for a 1031 exchange, and they'll work with your qualified intermediary. And so that is something that some sellers are willing to do. And they mention that in the auction as well. You still have to go through and do all the due diligence in that case if you're facilitating the transaction or identifying the property yourself. And that would mean like running title to make sure that the seller owns what they say they own, getting a valuation to make sure you're paying a fair price for the property. And then the thing that you can do also is, working within somebody that has contacts in the industry that with these funds that, buy and sell minerals, is to find someone that is willing to carve out a percentage of a property they own. Maybe they own 1,000 net acres in several mineral tracts in an area with a bunch of different wells. And they'll carve out a fraction of that to meet your investing need. Maybe it's 300,000 you're looking to invest. And so they'll say, okay, well, we'll carve out 10% or whatever the percentage is to meet that $300,000 investment requirement. And you can go that way. But then again, you just need to get help with that to make sure that you're getting what you think you're getting, and then also that you're not overpaying for that. In other words, you're maximizing the net interest that you're getting for that $300,000 or whatever the investment amount is. So definitely lots of ways to go about it, but it can be a great way to roll over a investment property into another type of investment, whether you have multiple residential investment properties and you want to diversify and buy some minerals and royalties, that can be a great way to go about it. So.
Absolutely, Matt. And, it's interesting. There's so many different facets into it. But like you said, 1031 exchange is a whole other layer of complexity. And though it's a really great option to use, it's definitely worth learning a bit more before you dive in. Matt, our next one here is from Lydia, and she's asking the $1 million question. We hear this so many times. And I know for me, this was personally a challenge to figure out that first time. But Lydia says, thanks you, Matt. I love your conversational approach. I've researched the deeds on our property, but I would like to accurately calculate my ownership interest and then calculate the royalty interest on my wells. And Matt, it sounds like Lydia has done some work. So for step one is the title search. You got to do from patent to present. And that's when, the ownership was 100% and how it got subdivided over time typically. Once you know the net interest in your tract, you can calculate the number of net mineral acres and use that to determine your decimal interest in each of your wells. And then, Matt, from there, you're really starting to look at the engineering. And so I'm going to let you take it from there because this is the part I think that loses most. And for me, at least, is still kind of a bit difficult touch and go.
Yeah, it can get very technical, especially if you have interest in Texas because they don't have pooling. And so there are things like allocation wells that can get very complicated to calculate the interest, at least initially. But once you get the hang of what they're trying to achieve there, it's pretty straightforward. But yeah, definitely something where once you have that basic information, it sounds like you have copies of all your deeds, Lydia, and you would just need to make sure that you went back all the way to when that land was initially granted to an individual. And like Justin said, from patent, that's what that's called, when the land was patented, to present day. And then if you have that chain of title outlined, you put that in a run sheet. I'll link to in my show notes how to perform a title search. That episode, we have a copy of a run sheet template that you can use to document everything. And then in there, you need to go through and read each instrument. So that's the key step in doing a title search and understanding what it says. What was conveyed? Was it 100% of the minerals? Did they reserve the minerals? And you just have to trace that mineral ownership over time and how it was subdivided, like Justin said, and then figure out what you ended up with. And once you have that fraction, then from there, you can figure out how much you should get paid on your wells. And so assuming you know that fraction from doing the mineral title search, then you would need to go to your state oil and gas commission website. We did a video series on this, on how to actually do this step by step. So go back to that and we'll link to that in the show notes as well. And you need to find two key pieces of information. That's a copy of your drilling permit, or sometimes it's called the APD. So that's basically the approval to drill the well. And then the well plat, which is the map that shows the pooled acreage that the well is pulling the oil and gas from. And once you know that, you can calculate your decimal interest by taking your fractional interest in that mineral tract, and then how many gross acres make up that pooled unit that the well or wells are drawing oil from under the ground. And then you basically multiply those by your lease royalty rate. So for example, here's some numbers you can use, and you can, customize this to your specific situation. But if you had a 25% royalty rate and you owned one half of the mineral rights under 40 gross acres, in other words, you own 20 net mineral acres, so that's one half times 40 is 20. That's where I got that. And then the drilling spacing unit, let's say it was 1,280 acres or 2 sections of land. Well, you would calculate your decimal interest in those wells that are part of that pooled unit by going and multiplying 25% or 0.25 times 0.5 for your one half interest times 40 gross acres in your mineral tract, and then divide that by 1,280 acres in that unit, and you would get 0.00390625. And something to note is the net revenue interest, or that decimal interest. That's another term that's used in the industry. That is calculated to 8 decimal places. So you'll see that on your division order to 8 decimal places. And that's the process you would go through to when you get the division orders for those new wells, Lydia, that you would go through those steps to confirm that that decimal interest on your division order matches what you think it should. And that can get very involved, like just probably me describing a math equation probably made a lot of people's eyes roll. So I apologize for that, but just to help give you a feel for how that's done. And, if you're a visual learner like me, you can go to episode 3, which is how to calculate your net revenue interest in 3 simple steps. And we walk through that process as well. So another thing to mention, if you are unsure of where to go to find these documents, your deeds and leases and things like that, or how to navigate the State Oil and Gas Commission and what documents you should even be looking for, I cover all of that step by step in my Mineral Management Basics course, which you can find at mineralrightspodcast.com/courses. And we'll put a link to that in the show notes as well.
You said it, Matt. Yeah, and this is every so often something I have to re-step through. And it's not uncommon for me to go to episode 3 and use the resources. If it's not something you do all the time, Matt, it's easy to forget these steps. But once you got it down, it's pretty easy to plug it in from there. Matt, our next one here is from Sandra. So Sandra says that the layman wants to purchase our mineral rights in West Virginia and has done the title work. We want to lease, not sell. Can we ask the landman for the portion of the title work that pertains to my mom, or should I offer to pay for that title work? They said they don't have the land description or the tax parcel number. And Matt, this is an interesting question. It's certainly something I would ask for immediately. And I would assume that they probably don't have a problem providing that to you.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think there's definitely no harm in asking. The worst they could say is no, but you never know. They might be willing to share that information to earn your trust, to help lease from you or to purchase your interest. It sounds like you want to lease. And so sometimes when a landman approaches you wanting to purchase the interest, they may also be willing to lease. Now, if you go down that route, there's some different things you want to do to make sure you're getting the best lease offer. And so that might be looking at who the operators are in the area, who might ultimately operate the wells that are drilled, and approaching them as well and seeing if they're interested in leasing, and get multiple competing lease offers to make sure you're getting the best deal. And if you don't know the legal land description, I am sure that is something that they would be willing to tell you. So you could say, hey, I just want to make sure I understand which property of ours you're looking to buy. Can you send over the legal description of the property that you'd like to buy? And they will do that because they want to try to move forward and try to get you to sell. Now, the thing that they may not provide is a copy of the title research that they've done, because they may have spent a lot of time and or expense to acquire that title work. And so that is generally proprietary information, especially from a mineral buyer perspective, because not everybody has that. And, it's their sort of secret sauce to figuring out who the owners are and who they should contact to make offers to purchase. And so they may or may not be willing to provide that, but maybe they could at least send you a copy of the latest deed that would vest title to one of your ancestors that would ultimately go to you. And so in this case, to your mom. So like if you have the deed that conveyed those interests to your mom, and you can find that out on your own as well, especially if that county in West Virginia has those property records online. You can do a title search on your own and look for your mom's name and see what pops up and download those deeds or oil and gas leases that she had received back in the day. And that could also a valuable thing to have copies of. So yeah, definitely using that legal description. Once you get that, do the research of the property further on your own on that, again, that county clerk and recorder's website, if it's online or if you don't have to go into the courthouse to do that. And then also go to the State Oil and Gas Commission website, because if you're getting a landman contacting you out of the blue to purchase your interest, there's probably some wells that are getting ready to be drilled. So that's something you can do your own research on. We haven't covered West Virginia yet, but we will in the future. But you can follow the steps that we followed in some of those other videos and kind of use those same principles to find the information in West Virginia as well.
And Matt, our next question here from Gary is pretty similar of a situation. So Gary says, hello, Matt. My wife has been contacted to sign a royalty lease, of which she has a very small interest, less than half an acre of a total 144 acres split over 3 properties. It's a new LLC just formed, and I assume he's referring to the operating company or perhaps referring to where the minerals were held. But at the time, there's no drilling activity. He's looking to educate him and get leads on a mineral rights attorney in West Virginia. And hoping to learn some information here. And Matt, a great place to start would be our episode 6, how to negotiate an oil and gas lease. And I'm sure you've got some more tips as well.
Yeah, that's a first place to start. The other one that I like just for negotiating tactics in general, whether it's negotiating an oil and gas lease, the sale of a property, or buying a car, if you need to go do that, is the book Never Split the Difference. And it's written by a former FBI hostage negotiator named Chris Voss. So we have a link to that in the show notes as well. It's one of my favorite negotiating books. But one of the things to think about, Gary, and I know you're probably already looking at this, is the cost benefit analysis of hiring an attorney to help you negotiate the lease versus how much you will get in the combination of the lease bonus and then the royalty payments over time. And so obviously you want that to be a positive investment in your time and effort in hiring that attorney. There are some tips I can say. If she has 1/2 net mineral acre, then, it's probably going to be a wash in terms of the lease bonus that you receive versus the cost to have the attorney review the lease. So that probably is worth it because the upside will be in those royalties. And if you do a good job of negotiating the lease up front, you'll maximize your royalties over time. So that means, things like trying to negotiate the highest lease royalty rate, and then also minimizing post-production deductions, especially in West Virginia with natural gas that is likely to be produced there. You're going to have costs to compress, transport, and to treat that raw gas and take it to the gas plant where then they'll convert it into natural gas to be sold into the pipeline. And then also there may be some natural gas liquids that are extracted and have some value. And if you can minimize those post-production deductions, then you'll get the most from those royalty payments in the future. So hopefully that helps, and good luck with everything.
All right, Matt. Our next question here is from another Sandra. Not sure if it's the same Sandra, but Sandra says, hello, Matt. Thanks for reaching out. I'm unsure if I still hold mineral rights on a specific location in Utah. I have the location from the county records office. She goes on to say, I signed an oil and gas lease, which is now expired. There's no active drilling going on in the area. A one-time payment was made into her father's trust, and she doesn't know where the title is, which I'm assuming she's referring to the physical title. The county's record office does not have the title information on the mineral rights, only the surface, and I do not own the surface. And basically, looks like she's looking to close her father's trust as part of the estate and wanted to be sure it's not going to impact the mineral rights going forward. And she's just looking for some information related to that, and doesn't look like she's having much luck finding it online.
Yeah, that's something that you might want to get help from a landman. I actually interviewed landman Ryan Fairbanks, and I'll link to the episode in the show notes. And that was episode 249. And Ryan is there in, I think, Duchesne County, Utah, kind of the heart of the Uinta Basin. And so if your interests are close to that, it might be worth giving Ryan a call, and he can help you with doing a little bit of research to try to track down what your deceased father owned in the trust. And it could be that the trust was never funded. In other words, that the minerals were never conveyed into the trust. It really depends on who owns those minerals. And, if the trust owns them, closing them could be problematic if you needed to convey the minerals out of the trust. So there's certainly something to get with an attorney that's licensed to practice in Utah. Reach out to me if you need a referral. I know a few attorneys out there that could help. But yeah, definitely something to get help from an attorney to figure out the steps you need to go through to close the trust and then also to convey the interests, because you may need to do some title curative, especially if the interests are not held in your father's name, because that is something that you might need to open probate or reopen probate and then go through the process of conveying those minerals to the heirs and to make sure that you get it into your name and then any of those other heirs' names so that you can have marketable title, which would be required to get paid royalties in the future if a well is ever drilled. So hopefully that helps. And yeah, good luck with everything. I know title research in Utah can be kind of tricky. I know Duchesne County, which I've done some title research there for clients, you have to have a subscription to and have this very complicated login access system to get into the actual database to do the research. It's not just a simple web portal that you can go to. So yeah, reach out if you need help or if you need references to an attorney. And then if you are still trying to track down the title ownership, a quick call with Ryan Fairbanks might be helpful. So good luck, Sandra.
All right, Matt. Well, that wraps them up for this episode. I'm sure we'll have more to crunch through in the next one.
Yeah, some great questions. And, I think we're seeing some common themes here. Definitely a lot of interest in investing. If you want some help with that, I do coaching for people that want to get into investing in minerals and royalties just to understand the asset class. Taking my course is actually a great way to understand exactly the nuances between the different types of oil and gas interests and some of the due diligence steps that you need to go through when making an investment in minerals and royalties. So even though it's mineral management basics, it's really also kind of mineral investing basics as well. So again, you can find more information on the course at mineralrightspodcast.com/courses. And then some great questions about taxes, which is, always a concern, and then leasing and things like that. So that's always useful to make sure that you're up on exactly what you need to be doing to maximizing and making the most of your minerals and royalties. And so a lot of great questions here.
You got it, Matt.
All right. Well, thanks again for listening. We'll catch you in the next episode. Thanks, Justin.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks so much for listening to the Mineral Rights Podcast with your host, Matt Sands. Don't forget to subscribe and share at mineralrightspodcast.com. The Mineral Rights Podcast should not be construed as investment, legal, or tax advice. All information is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy.